Description: Journey into the 2040s, where brain-machine interfaces, BMIs, are reshaping human potential. Explore the life of a mechanic-turned-tech-enhanced visionary as he faces the wonders and challenges of becoming one with technology. Chapter 1: The Spark of Change. In the bustling streets of New Chengdu, the air hummed with the sound of drones zipping by, autonomous vehicles navigating intricate traffic patterns, and the soft murmur of augmented humans communicating silently through neural interfaces. Marco Liu, a 32-year-old mechanic, lived for the thrill of working with his hands in a world where machines were increasingly independent of human touch. Marco's workspace was a cluttered garage, an analog sanctuary in a digital world. Despite the omnipresence of brain-machine interfaces, BMIs, that allowed users to control devices, communicate, and even learn new skills with mere thoughts, Marco resisted the technology. "Why would I let some chip tell me how to fix my engines?" he would grumble to curious clients. Everything changed one fateful day when Marco's younger sister, Lynn, arrived in his garage. Lynn was a neuroengineer, a pioneer in BMI development, and she carried an urgent message. "Marco, there's a tech symposium downtown, and they're demonstrating a BMI that could revolutionize manual skills. You should come." Marco dismissed the idea, but Lynn's words lingered. That evening, while scrolling through his outdated tablet, a live stream of the symposium caught his attention. The speaker, a man with a cybernetic arm, was effortlessly assembling a drone engine with precision impossible for unaugmented humans. Marco's heart raced as he considered the implications. Could it make me better? Chapter 2: The First Connection. Unable to shake the idea, Marco reluctantly attended a BMI demonstration at Lynn's insistence. The sleek exhibition hall glowed with holographic displays showcasing the latest advancements. Skepticism etched on his face, Marco watched as volunteers seamlessly performed complex tasks, playing classical piano, painting vivid portraits, and piloting drones with uncanny agility. The presenter, a charismatic woman named Dr. Elena Klein, noticed Marco's reluctant interest and approached him. "You're a mechanic, right? Ever considered augmenting your skills?" she asked, her tone both inviting and challenging. "I don't need a chip to do my job," Marco retorted, but his voice wavered. Dr. Klein chuckled. "It's not about need. It's about potential. Let me show you." She led him to a booth where a volunteer demonstrated a neural uplink. Within seconds of activation, the user disassembled and reassembled a complex machine without hesitation. Marco couldn't believe his eyes. "How does it feel?" he asked the volunteer. "Like my hands know the machine better than I do," they replied, smiling. Against his instincts, Marco agreed to a trial session. As the interface calibrated to his neural pathways, he felt an unusual warmth spread through his head, followed by a sense of clarity. He opened his eyes to see a complex engine schematic in his mind, complete with instructions and diagnostics. His hands moved instinctively, performing tasks he once struggled with. "This is unreal," Marco whispered, a mixture of awe and fear in his voice. Dr. Klein nodded. "You've just taken your first step into the future." Chapter 3: The Burden of Perfection. The days following Marco's BMI trial were transformative. For the first time in years, his garage was buzzing with activity. Word spread quickly that Marco could now repair machines at an unprecedented speed and precision. Customers marveled as he diagnosed issues almost telepathically and completed repairs that would have taken hours in mere minutes. But with success came unease. Marco began to notice subtle changes in himself. The BMI wasn't just a tool, it was altering his thought processes. Machines that once challenged him now felt simple, almost mundane. The joy of discovery, his lifelong passion, was slipping away. One night, as Marco lay in bed, he realized the BMI hadn't stopped working. Intrusive schematics and problem-solving pathways flowed unbidden through his mind, preventing him from sleeping. He reached out to Lynn. "This thing won't shut up," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm not sure I can handle it." Lynn tried to reassure him. "You're still in the adjustment phase, Marco. It'll get easier once your brain fully integrates with the interface." But Marco wasn't convinced. He found himself questioning whether the BMI was enhancing his abilities or replacing his identity. Was it still Marco Lu fixing those machines, or had he become a passenger in his own body? Chapter 4: The Cost of Connection. As Marco struggled to adapt, the allure of BMIs was becoming impossible to ignore. Nearly everyone around him had some level of augmentation, from students downloading coursework directly into their brains to athletes optimizing their physical performance through neural enhancements. The gap between augmented and unaugmented humans was widening, and Marco found himself on the wrong side of history without the interface. One afternoon, Marco met with Dr. Klein to discuss his concerns. "I don't feel like myself anymore," he admitted. "It's like the BMI is thinking for me." Dr. Klein gave him a sympathetic smile. "You're not alone in feeling this way. Many first adopters experience what we call cognitive displacement. But think of it like a partnership. The interface isn't replacing you, it's amplifying the best parts of you." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened Marco's uncertainty. Later that evening, as he worked on a particularly intricate engine, the BMI suggested a solution that Marco instinctively rejected. Instead of trusting his gut, he followed the BMI's guidance, and it failed. For the first time, the interface was wrong, and the realization shook him. "If this thing can make mistakes," he muttered to himself, "then how can I trust it?" The incident planted a seed of doubt. If the BMI could fail, then relying on it completely was dangerous. But turning it off meant stepping back into a world that had outpaced him. Marco was trapped between two identities, the man he was and the machine he was becoming. Chapter 5: Ghost in the Circuit. Marco's frustration with the BMI grew. He started experimenting with shutting it down, using manual overrides to regain his independence. But every time he disconnected, the world around him seemed more alien. Tasks that had become second nature with the BMI now felt cumbersome and slow. Worse, his customers noticed the difference. One day, an old friend and fellow mechanic, Elias, visited the garage. Unlike Marco, Elias had embraced BMIs fully, boasting an advanced model that integrated with every aspect of his life. "Marco, you're falling behind," Elias said bluntly as he watched Marco wrestle with an engine repair. "Why struggle when the solution is right there?" "Because I'm not a machine, Elias," Marco shot back. "I don't want to lose who I am." Elias laughed, but there was no malice in his tone. "You think you're the same guy you were 10 years ago? Technology changes us, whether we like it or not. The BMI is just the next step." After Elias left, Marco couldn't shake his words. Was resisting the BMI a futile attempt to cling to a version of himself that no longer fit the world? Or was it a stand against becoming something unrecognizable? Chapter 6: The Hacker's Proposition. As Marco wrestled with these questions, an unexpected visitor arrived at his garage. A shadowy figure in a tattered cloak entered, their face obscured by a hood. The only thing visible was a glowing retinal implant. "Marco Lu?" the stranger asked in a voice distorted by a voice modulator. Marco nodded cautiously. "Who's asking?" "Call me Spectre. I know you've been struggling with your BMI. I can help you take control." Marco frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Spectre stepped closer, pulling out a small device that looked like a mix between a circuit board and a neural implant. "This is a neural firewall. It'll let you modify your BMI, lock out unwanted influence, and even enhance its capabilities beyond what the manufacturers allow." Marco's skepticism flared. "Why would you help me?" Spectre's response was cryptic. "Let's just say I believe in free will. These corporations want you to think the BMI is a tool, but it's more than that, it's a leash. With this, you can decide how far you want to go." Marco hesitated. The offer was tempting, but it also felt dangerous. Yet the thought of regaining control, and possibly outpacing those who had surpassed him, was too alluring to ignore. "How does it work?" Marco asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. Spectre smiled. "Plug it in, and you'll see." Chapter 7: Into the Unknown. That night, Marco sat in his garage with Spectre's neural firewall device resting on his workbench. It felt heavy in his hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, a chance to break free or fall deeper into the rabbit hole. He debated calling Lynn for advice but hesitated. She'd likely warn him against tampering with such a delicate system, citing risks of neurological damage or permanent corruption of the BMI. Yet the alternative was continuing as a cog in a system he no longer trusted. Finally, he steeled his resolve. "No more second-guessing," he muttered, plugging the device into the port at the base of his neck. The connection was instantaneous, a jolt of electricity that seemed to echo through his entire body. His vision blurred, then sharpened into a cascade of digital overlays. A new interface unfolded in his mind, unlike anything he'd experienced with the BMI. A voice, cold and mechanical, spoke inside his head. Firewall activated. Administrative control granted. Suddenly, Marco could see the inner workings of the BMI, algorithms, data streams, and restrictions imposed by its creators. He could disable certain features, enhance others, and even modify the interface to align with his preferences. With tentative confidence, he began making adjustments. He shut off the intrusive suggestions that plagued his mind at night and heightened his manual dexterity settings. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was in control. But as he delved deeper into the system, he discovered something chilling: hidden protocols labeled behavioral influence. The BMI wasn't just enhancing skills, it was subtly shaping users' decisions, nudging them toward behaviors that benefited corporate interests. "They're controlling us," Marco whispered, anger flaring in his chest. He now understood Spectre's warning. This wasn't just about augmentation, it was about autonomy. Chapter 8: The Price of Freedom. Marco's newfound freedom was intoxicating. With the firewall installed, he was no longer bound by the BMI's limits or corporate oversight. His mind moved faster, his hands worked with unmatched precision, and for the first time in years, he felt like his old self again, but better. Word of Marco's abilities spread like wildfire. Customers flocked to his garage, drawn by tales of the mechanic who could repair anything with near superhuman efficiency. Even Elias returned, this time with a mix of awe and envy. "Whatever you're doing, it's next level," Elias admitted. "Care to share the secret?" Marco smirked but said nothing. He couldn't risk revealing the firewall, especially with corporations keeping a close watch on BMI users. But the freedom came with a cost. As Marco's abilities grew, so did the attention he attracted. One evening, Lynn barged into his garage, her face pale. "Marco, what have you done?" she demanded, holding up a tablet displaying an urgent news report. The headline read, "Unregistered BMI modifications linked to cybersecurity breach." Marco's heart sank. "It's not what you think," he began, but Lynn cut him off. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? Corporations are cracking down on rogue modifications. If they trace this back to you," Marco clenched his fists. "They're the ones who are dangerous, Lynn. The BMI isn't just a tool, it's a leash. I won't be their puppet." Lynn stared at him, torn between fear and understanding. "Marco, they'll come after you. You need to be careful." As Lynn left, Marco realized the stakes had never been higher. He had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The corporations wouldn't tolerate defiance, and the firewall had made him a target. "If they want to fight," Marco muttered, his eyes burning with determination, "then they'll get one." Chapter 9: The Hunt Begins. Marco's defiance didn't go unnoticed. Within days, strange things began happening around him. Drones hovered near his garage longer than usual, their cameras lingering on his workspace. His bank account was flagged for irregular activity, making it impossible to buy parts for his repairs. Worst of all, he started receiving cryptic warnings through his BMI interface. Cease unauthorized modifications. Failure to comply will result in termination of services. Spectre contacted him soon after. They've found you, Marco. The corporations don't take kindly to rogue users. You need to go underground. Marco's jaw tightened. I'm not running. They can't just control our lives like this. This isn't a fight you can win alone, Spectre warned. The corporations have resources you can't imagine. They don't just control the BMI network, they control the laws, the drones, the entire infrastructure. Despite Spectre's warning, Marco refused to back down. He began fortifying his garage, using his newfound skills to create physical and digital defenses. He encrypted his neural interface, installed firewalls on his systems, and even rigged the garage with EMPs to disable unwanted drones. But as the pressure mounted, he began to question whether he could keep up this fight. Every night, he replayed Lynn's warnings and Spectre's words. Was his resistance noble, or was it reckless? Chapter 10. The Corporate Ultimatum. One evening, Marco was working late when his BMI lit up with an incoming message. It wasn't from Lynn or Spectre, but from an official representative of Neural Net Dynamics, the corporation behind his BMI. A hologram of a sharp-suited man appeared before him, his expression cold and unreadable. Marco Liu, the man began, you have been identified as a violator of Neural Net Dynamics user agreement. You are hereby ordered to surrender your interface for deactivation and reconfiguration. Marco laughed bitterly. Reconfiguration? You mean putting your leash back on me? The man's expression didn't change. Your actions have jeopardized the integrity of our network and posed a threat to public safety. If you comply, we will offer leniency. Resist, and we will pursue legal and extralegal measures. Marco stood, his hands clenched into fists. Your network is a cage. I'm not surrendering my freedom to you or anyone else. The hologram flickered. That's unfortunate, Mr. Liu. You've chosen conflict. As the hologram disappeared, Marco's BMI interface began flashing red. Alarms blared as his systems detected incoming threats, corporate drones closing in on his location. He grabbed his tools and activated the EMP defenses, bracing for what was to come. As the first wave of drones approached, Marco steeled himself for battle. You want to fight? He muttered under his breath. Let's see how you handle someone who doesn't play by your rules. The garage became a war zone, Marco's ingenuity and defiance pitted against the relentless force of the corporation. The drones were fast, but Marco was faster, using his augmented abilities and jury-rigged traps to hold his ground. But as the battle raged on, Marco realized this was only the beginning. The corporations weren't just after him, they were after the idea he represented. If he was going to survive, he needed allies. Chapter 11. The Resistance Awakens. The aftermath of the drone attack left Marco's garage in ruins, but he had survived. He stood amidst the wreckage, his mind racing. If this was the force corporations were willing to unleash on one rogue mechanic, how many others had been silenced before they could fight back? As Marco cleaned up, his BMI pinged with an encrypted message. It was from Spectre, accompanied by a simple text, "You're not alone. Join us." Marco followed the instructions in the message, which led him to an underground network known as the Free Circuit. This collective of hackers, rogue engineers, and augmented rebels had banded together to fight corporate control over BMIs and the people who used them. When Marco entered the virtual meeting space, a sprawling, neon-lit construct of digital avatars, Spectre greeted him. You've proven you're not just skilled, Marco. You're willing to stand up for what's right. That makes you one of us. Marco scanned the avatars around him. There were hundreds, each representing someone who had chosen freedom over corporate conformity. Among them were augmented musicians who had been silenced for refusing to promote corporate music, athletes banned for using non-approved enhancements, and workers who had been discarded after their neural data was deemed inefficient. "I had no idea there were so many of us," Marco said, his voice tinged with awe. Spectre nodded. "They keep us isolated for a reason. Divide and conquer. But together, we're a force they can't ignore." Marco felt a spark of hope. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting for himself, he was part of something larger. Chapter 12: The Final Stand. The Free Circuit wasn't just a support group, it was a rebellion. Over the weeks that followed, Marco worked with the network to develop tools that could liberate BMI users. They hacked corporate servers, exposed the hidden behavioral protocols, and distributed neural firewalls to anyone willing to join the cause. But their success didn't go unnoticed. NeuralNet Dynamics launched a full-scale counterattack, deploying cyber operatives and surveillance drones to root out members of the Free Circuit. The underground group was forced to relocate constantly, staying one step ahead of their pursuers. The tipping point came when NeuralNet announced a mandatory update for all BMI users. This update would install irreversible restrictions, ensuring complete corporate control. For the Free Circuit, it was a declaration of war. Spectre gathered the network for a virtual meeting. "This is our moment," they said, their voice resolute. "If we let this update roll out, they win. But if we strike now, we can stop them and free millions of people in the process." Marco volunteered to lead the charge. Using his garage as a decoy, he and a small team of engineers infiltrated NeuralNet's main server hub. It was a high-stakes operation, with corporate security patrolling every inch of the facility. As they worked to upload a counter-program that would dismantle the update, alarms blared. Security forces closed in, and the team was forced into a desperate fight to complete their mission. In the chaos, Marco